falling for someone new. After discovering my ex's affair, I finally moved on. But now, he's painting me as the villain to our friends and family. How do I clear my name without sacrificing my newfound happiness? This is a lengthy post, so I appreciate your patience. I am now 36 years old and met my ex, who is also 36 years old, in 2009. I believed we had a perfect relationship, especially in our youth. At the beginning, our relationship seemed flawless. We fell in love quickly, at least. That is what I thought about 3 months into our relationship. My ex came over to my parents' house for a few hours, as I had just temporarily moved back in with them. He asked if he could check his social media on my laptop. "Of course, make yourself at home," I replied. A few hours later, he needed to return to his parents' house. After he left, I went to the laptop to check my own social media and realized he had forgotten to log out. For some reason, my intuition urged me to check his messages on one of the social media platforms. I discovered a message from a woman. She wrote, "If anything happens between you and Laura, let me know." His response was, "Of course I will." It felt like an enormous gut punch. Perhaps I overreacted, but I called him immediately. I shouted at him for messaging another woman, promising to inform her if we broke up. At that moment, I declared, "It is over between us, go be with her." A few hours later, his father brought my ex back to my parents' house. I did not want to see him, so my parents went outside. His father defended him, saying it was a mistake and that he did not mean anything by it, just the typical things loving parents say. I took him back the next day. Many years later, we moved into our own apartment. Everything seemed fine until my libido began to decline, and I could not understand why. It pushed my ex and me apart. I went for my 3-year pap smear test and waited a couple of weeks for the results. When they arrived, the letter stated high-grade dyskaryosis, high grade. I was terrified and looked it up online, discovering it meant precancerous cells in my cervix. During this time, my ex was as supportive as he could be. I didn't believe I had anything to worry about, at least not about my results, but rather about him. A few weeks later, I needed a minor operation to remove the cells from my cervix. My mother accompanied me to the hospital and waited patiently after I emerged from the recovery room. When I returned to the room where my mother was waiting for me, a nurse came in and asked if I wanted anything to eat or drink. I was so hungry, having not eaten anything since the previous night. So of course, I ate 4 slices of toast due to my hunger. Once they confirmed that I could eat, drink, and use the bathroom properly, they sent me home. About 4 hours after returning home from the hospital, I received a message on a social media platform. It was from a woman, not the same one my ex had messaged years earlier, but a different one. She said, "I am so sorry to have to tell you this, but Michael, my ex, has been cheating on you. I am only telling you this because he has blocked my number and blocked me on social media, but I remember seeing your name appear on his profile." My heart sank because I knew it was true. I did not reply immediately since my ex was being kind and caring after my return home. However, I needed to hear it from him. I instructed him to sit down next to me and to look me dead in the eye. I stated, "I just received a message from Sarah. She told me you have cheated on me with her. I want you to tell me the truth. I will know if you are lying." In that moment, I knew for certain that he had cheated. His entire demeanor shifted, and I could see a change in his eyes that confirmed my suspicions. Naturally, he denied it until he was blue in the face. I refused to let it go. I kept insisting he was lying. I told him, "Regardless of what you say, if you do not tell me the truth, I am leaving. If you do tell me the truth, I am still going, so you may as well just come clean." Several moments that felt like hours passed before he looked away from me and finally said, "Yes, I slept with her in our bed." What happened next is something I will always feel ashamed of. I hit him not just once. I unleashed my anger on him because he had betrayed me. He had caused me pain. I wanted him to experience the hurt he inflicted upon me. That same day, I had undergone an operation. My parents came to my apartment to help pack a few things to take to their place. I drove, but I still felt the effects of the anesthesia in my system. My parents exchanged a few words with him before taking me home. I cried all the way to their house, feeling hurt. My mother asked me to stay in her bed that night for comfort. I felt like a child again, cradled in my mother's arms for a couple of hours as I sobbed. He kept texting me, trying to apologize, but I ignored him. I still believed I loved him and did not want to throw away nearly 10 years together. The next day, he messaged me asking to talk, and I agreed. I went over to our apartment to have an honest discussion. We talked for several hours, during which he promised to change and do anything to prove his love for me. I told him, "I will give you one more chance, but we are moving out of this apartment. I will never sleep in that bed again. You will have to delete all your social media accounts, change your phone number, and grant me full access to your phone every single day for me to trust you." He agreed, saying, "I want to earn your love and trust." A few months later, after we moved in with my parents, my family encouraged us to buy our own home. We made an offer on a house we adored, and it was accepted. We moved in 5 years ago on September 5. Now, I wish we had not, because in the 2 years after moving into our home, I began to fall out of love with him. I could not stop reflecting on the pain he caused me and could not trust him anymore, even though I had full access to his phone every day. His infidelity deeply affected me. I sought an escape from him, which led me to play games on my computer. I shut out the whole world, particularly any contact with my ex. I started playing a game that involved chatting with others. There was one guy who was incredibly sweet. We began as friends, but there was something about him that attracted me. Eventually, I developed strong feelings for him and got butterflies realizing that I was in love. However, I faced the dilemma of still being in a relationship with my ex, despite having mentally checked out long before. I felt trapped because I still shared the house with my ex, even though I knew I had feelings for this new guy, who reciprocated my affections. One day, my ex woke up exceptionally early for work, logged onto the computer, and discovered all my conversations with this guy. When he found out, I felt relieved because I wanted the relationship to end. However, he suggested couples counseling, which I declined, knowing I was no longer invested in the relationship. I did not want him anymore. My feelings had dissipated entirely. As for the guy I started talking to on the computer, things have worked out extraordinarily well with him. He treats me differently than any previous man. He constantly tells me he loves me, frequently compliments me, and expresses how much I mean to him. He is a true gentleman and is protective of me not in a jealous way, but in a manner that ensures no one can harm me. My ex, conversely, was hard to elicit any affection from, offering hardly any "I love yous." I am certain now that I have found the man of my dreams. He embodies everything I have ever wanted in a partner and beyond. I am currently trying to sell my house with my ex. The process is slow, but we are making progress. However, now he is going around telling people that I cheated, and they all believe him. I have attempted to defend myself, arguing that if he had not slept with someone else in the first place, perhaps things would have turned out differently. My family, aside from my parents and brother, has all changed toward me, even though they knew my ex had cheated on me. It feels as if they no longer want to be around me. One of my cousins is close with my ex. They have even gone out to dinner together with their partners. Is my ex turning my family and friends against me? He is portraying me as the villain, and now I am beginning to question if I am. I am unsure how to deal with this situation. I recognize that 2 wrongs do not make a right, and I fully accept that we were both at fault. I am just exhausted from him continually blaming me and not acknowledging his own actions. Story 2. I, M26, am struggling to find a reason to stay married to my wife, F26, as we approach our 10-year anniversary. My wife and I are supposed to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary of being together, having been married for 5 of those years. We embodied everything that most people desire during high school, filled with all the romance and affection we could offer each other. Despite both of our families being challenging, we stuck together even when faced with conflicts arising from the differing attitudes of each family. Her family disintegrated within a year of our dating, which resulted in me taking on a father figure role for her 5 siblings who have not lived with us. They are growing up, as the youngest sibling is currently 13 at the time of this post. While I was 1 year behind in school, she started working at a gas station and saved up some money until I graduated and began working different jobs, managing to earn enough to support both of us. I always romanticized the concept of a stay-at-home wife while the husband worked. However, as bills and vacations arose, I realized I was struggling significantly to save money until I figured out how savings worked for me and began to build a small emergency fund. Since I was earning a good wage while working at the jail, I explained to my then-girlfriend that I needed her to work to help us save money so we could afford a vacation and save for a house. Her response was to find a job 2 hours north of where we lived, working in home health care. She told me that in order for her to work, we had to move 2 hours away to be closer to her friend. With a dream and the hopeful mindset that everything would work out, we moved. I had to completely deplete my savings to cover the security deposit and the first month's rent. In hindsight, this was a poor decision, but there is no going back now. While we were there, it quickly became clear that we needed a second car to commute to work, which for her was an hour and a half further north. I vividly remember sitting in the bank office and telling her that we could not afford for her not to work, as we would easily lose the car. She agreed and understood the financial implications when I signed my name to secure the car, allowing us to maximize our income together. Shortly thereafter, I sat down with her almost 2 months later and asked her to please find a job closer, as the gas expenses were outrageous and were overwhelming us, even with her working. From what she informed me, she attempted to transfer, but somehow her paperwork got lost, leading her to go 3 months without pay while she waited for them to perhaps assign her to a position just 20 minutes away. This assignment never materialized, and soon afterward, we fell behind on our payments. Eventually, we had to relocate to another state after I quit my job at the jail and began working in Ohio. The move was the most challenging experience I had faced in my life at that moment because, in order to work at a job that paid exceptionally well, I had to sleep in my car during the winter. I saved as much as possible while trying to stay warm at night. I remember surviving on a cup of ramen and a 35-cent can of macaroni and beef per day. I was financially strapped and working hard to create a better life for us, but what emotionally broke me was when an employee at Kroger noticed how much I was struggling and bought me a can opener. That gesture still brings me to tears. Once I managed to cover the first month of rent and get things in order, I developed diverticulitis, which caused the worst pain I have ever experienced. Since my job involved loading trucks with boxes, and I was unable to walk more than 10 feet, I was fired. Thankfully, I had my $401K from the jail to cover the next 2 months while I started a new job soon after, working in a car factory. During this time, my wife did not work a job longer than 2 months at a time and had no consecutive employment. While I was living and working in Ohio, she was unemployed. She brought her siblings to our apartment despite me telling her that we could not afford their visit, much less the gas to travel back and forth. Despite my objections, she went behind my back and brought them up not for a few days, but for a month and a half, while we struggled to buy food. This forced me to visit a food pantry, which was a blow to my pride. But I found that food pantries are incredible, and I am grateful for everyone working there. While in Ohio, she decided she wanted to take a vacation with 2 of her friends to the beach, which would not have been an issue if she had been working. She had about 8 months to secure a job and save money for this trip. However, about 3 weeks before she was set to leave, she found a job at a gas station where she worked for only 1 week before informing them she would be absent for another week to go to the beach, resulting in her termination. While she was down there, I realized she would need money, and since I was not being paid in time to help, I spent my day off doing DoorDash for almost 18 hours to earn $600 after covering my fuel expenses to send to her for the last day. Upon her return, everything seemed fine, but we went back to the state where she remained unemployed, which frustrated me even more. All this time, I believed I could earn enough to overcome this issue, but it never happened. Ultimately, I discovered a trucking job, and we lived in a semi-truck for almost a year, touring the country and visiting many beautiful places. As the oldest sibling needed a stable home following their departure from the grandparents, I found a location close enough to the school for him to complete his senior year. My wife stayed home, and since my company provided free college, I utilized those benefits to help her gain an education. During my time on the road, I would be away for 3 weeks at a time, and since I was earning around $1,700 a week, she did not have to work. However, I did provide her with $300 weekly to cover food, gym expenses, and a personal trainer to help her lose weight so we could eventually have children. Despite getting $1,200 a month for her nutrition and not having the obligation to work at that time, She lost no more than 20 pounds over the 2 years I drove. As with all good things, this arrangement came to an end when I lost my job. My income went from a take-home amount of $1,700 a week to about $500 a week when I found a new job back home. Since she was still in school and our benefits had ceased, we needed to pay an additional $400 a month on top of our other bills. I told her in August that I needed her to find a job and help because we would struggle to afford anything, and I was concerned we would go bankrupt if she did not assist me. According to her, from August until the middle of January, she claims to have gone on more than 20 interviews without securing a job, whether full-time or part-time. Now, I feel as if I am compelled to leave home to work and provide. It hurts that I must stay away from home to address everything while she refuses to work, which would have allowed me to remain at my current job and be home every night. I have reached a point where I feel emotionally exhausted and wonder how she could care for our children if something were to happen to me, or why she wouldn't support her husband so that he could be home every night with her. I am contemplating divorce, but I am seeking advice and different perspectives. I'm open to questions or opinions. Thank you for reading. TLDR: a husband is contemplating divorce due to his wife's refusal to work and assist, regardless of the circumstances. Story 3. After bringing my ex's daughters closer, I took him planning to move back to their hometown with my new family, but my ex claims it hurts the kids. Am I wrong for wanting to be near my kids after everything? So this is a lengthy narrative, so please sit back and enjoy the drama. In 2015, I got married and became a father to 3 daughters, ages 12, who is not biologically mine but whom I have raised since she was 3, and ages 4 and 3. After graduating from professional school, I relocated my family to a metropolitan area, where we lived for 4 years before I decided to return to professional school to specialize in my field. In 2020, just weeks before the onset of COVID-19, I found myself in an extramarital affair, leading to the end of my marriage. I was aware that it was a harmful decision and endeavored to support my ex-wife and children as best as I could. I agreed to provide my ex-wife with $4,000 per month for alimony and child support, despite being a full-time student, which meant I worked nights and weekends to earn money. My ex-wife decided to move 2.5 hours away, back to the same metropolitan area we had previously lived in, claiming that it was to make it more difficult for me to visit the children. She said she wanted to ensure I had to make more effort since she disliked that I could simply drop by. She also mentioned that the move was intended to bring her closer to her support network. I did not contest this decision, as I was focused on my studies. My eldest daughter, now 17, conspired with my ex-wife in an attempt to have me expelled from professional school by reporting me to the Title Roman IX office for my affair. In 2021, after my eldest daughter went to college in another state, my ex-wife remarried, and alimony of $2,500 per month ceased. Instead of terminating the alimony and only paying $1,500 in child support, I began paying $2,500 per month in child support and providing my college-aged daughter with $500 per month. During the summer of 2021, I completed my studies and moved 1.5 hours away from my children and ex-wife. I began seeing my children every other weekend, and now that I had finished school and was living only an hour and a half away, I decided to drive to take them out to dinner every Wednesday night. In the fall of 2021, my ex-wife divorced from her new husband. By the spring of 2022, my ex-wife met a random man online, began dating him, and moved him in with her and the children, all while not really having a job and relying on the child support I provided. I did not approve of the situation, but decided to tolerate it for the time being. During the summer of 2022, the man who had moved in finally left, although they were not really in a relationship anymore, and my ex-wife refused to evict him. I asked my ex-wife if she would like to relocate to the town where I was working so she and the children could be nearer to me. She agreed, and I covered most of the moving costs and assisted in getting them settled. Now they live just 10 minutes away from me. I communicated to my ex-wife that my desire for them to be closer was not an indication that I wanted to reconcile. She understood this, and I agreed to provide $3,000 per month to help alleviate her financial burdens while I helped find them a rental home. Life was great. In the fall of 2022, My children, aged 10 and 11, began using my address for school, but my ex-wife began dating another man, an older acquaintance whom I had introduced her to, and after a couple of months, she moved in with him. The children then relocated to another county approximately 30 minutes away. In the spring of 2023, I met someone new and began a relationship with her, although she lives 1.5 hours away from where I work and reside. The children were living with their mother and decided to switch schools to simplify transportation for my ex-wife, as they could take the bus from her house. By December 2023, I became engaged and continued to see my children every other weekend, as well as once a week for our dinner dates. I maintained my child support payments of $2,500 per month, in addition to $500 per month for my college-aged daughter. In the spring of 2024, I underwent surgery for thyroid cancer, got married, and moved to the area where my current wife is from, which is 2 hours away from my children. However, I still worked only 30 minutes from the children. I continued to see them weekly for our dinner dates and every other weekend. By July 2024, I had to leave my job due to non-compete constraints that prevented me from working in a state. Now, I live 2 hours away from my children, and my job requires me to drive 5 hours from them. I made the decision to reduce my work schedule to 3.5 days per week so that I could still take my daughters, now aged 12 and 13, out for dinner weekly and spend time with them every other weekend. Currently, I leave home early on Monday mornings while my current wife and her 2 children stay behind. I drive 3.5 hours to work and remain there until lunch on Thursday. On Thursdays, I drive 5 hours to take them out to dinner, and we stay in a hotel before I take them to school the following day. They recently expressed that they no longer want to stay in a hotel, but still wish for me to come and take them out to dinner. I am in the process of seeking a job to move closer to my children and have found an opportunity in the same metropolitan area where we all started out in 2015. Now my ex-wife is telling me that my children feel like second-class citizens and an afterthought, insisting that there is nothing positive about my potential return to their hometown. If I move, I will live and work 1 hour and 15 minutes from them, as opposed to my current living situation of 2 hours away and working 5 hours away. I can understand some of their feelings about it being unfair that they had to move away from this city to be closer to me, and yet now I plan to move back. I have analyzed this scenario from every angle. I still have a non-compete clause in place that restricts me from moving to the same area as they live. No opportunities exist in other directions. I'm relocating my wife and her children to a new area, away from their existing support system, in an effort to be closer to my children. Yet my ex-wife claims my children are hurt because I am moving my new family to their hometown. She is now married and seemingly living a fulfilling life, but cannot support my decision to move closer due to negative sentiments about it being their hometown. She seems to forget that she left her home with me when she remarried. So, am I the antagonist for contemplating a move back to my children's hometown with my current wife and her children in hopes of being closer to my biological children? Story 4. My 27F husband, 28M, is an egotistical narcissist who controlled me. How to deal with emotions after separating. My 27-year-old female, marriage to my husband, 28-year-old male, is ending after 1 year, and I do not know how to cope mentally. How do I navigate a divorce when he has shattered my self-esteem? How do I manage emotionally? I feel so lost. We had numerous differences when we met, and I believe we were focused more on physical attraction and desire rather than reality. We experienced very different upbringings, and he expected me to adapt solely to his needs without making any compromises for me. Our first argument occurred during our wedding, which my father generously paid for on his own. He refused to participate in the pre-wedding photo shoot, which was also very costly, because his family wanted to spend time with him. My siblings and I were understandably upset, because skipping the photos was a significant issue, and he yelled at me every moment we were alone during the reception, saying that he was older and that my siblings had no right to criticize him or express any negative opinions. He also refused to leave the wedding suite to attend the reception, and my family had to persuade him. During the wedding, He did not allow me to take photos on my own with my friends because, in his view, we were now married and couples do everything together. I posted a wedding selfie of myself on Instagram, which upset him further because he was not included. Yes, these incidents troubled me, but we were already married, and I tried to overlook them. I moved across the country, 10 hours away from my family, and sacrificed my career for him. He told me to take it easy for a while, stating that he would work and take care of me. That was my first mistake. I had no financial independence. The bare minimum anyone anticipates after marriage is a honeymoon, and he refused to do that as well, constantly discussing his family's financial struggles, which I understood. However, he would also complain about bills and rent that he had already been paying before marriage. I had virtually no expenses of my own. Any shopping I did was from my own savings, which also irritated him. I visited my father when he suffered a stroke, followed by a heart attack and heart surgery, and his family expressed their dissatisfaction and claimed that I was an irresponsible wife for abandoning him and his family. They perceived me as no longer being part of my family and belonging solely to theirs. They explicitly stated that wives should prioritize their husband's family above everything else. Furthermore, he did not view marriage as a partnership. He regarded it as me marrying him and his parents. He told me that I could not step a foot into his house unless I agreed to his terms. 11 months after our wedding, my younger siblings, aged 18, 19, and 22, came to visit us. He was very awkward, hardly engaging in conversation with them, which made me feel embarrassed. I tried to make the best of the situation and ensure they had a good time. When they left, my sister gifted us $500 as an anniversary present to use for traveling. This was when the real problems and his anger began. He and his family were incredibly upset that my sister had insulted and disrespected them with a cash gift. They perceived it as charity, which was absolutely baffling to my family, as they could not understand why this was such a big issue. He informed my family that this constituted financial abuse. Within 5 days, he quit his job and moved back in with his parents on the other side of the country due to feeling stressed and claiming that I was allowing my family to insult him. I stayed with his family for 2 weeks, and things became tense. One of the conditions he insisted on was living with his parents, and he made it clear that this was a deal-breaker for him. Although I was trying to adapt, that was not what I wanted. I was attempting to make our relationship work. Our first anniversary arrived, and he refused to celebrate because his family had never observed birthdays, holidays, or other occasions. My father sent us flowers through mail delivery, which also offended his family. I returned home shortly after because I had not seen my family in 7 months. This caused yet another issue, as his family was extremely upset that I had abandoned them, claiming I was not a dutiful and obedient wife, and asserting that my actions were out of line. All this commotion stemmed from my visit with my family. I have 2 ill grandparents and a sick father. They saw no justification for my visits unless someone died. Therefore, he issued me an ultimatum. If I did not return to him within 2 days, he would end our marriage. He wanted to be with only himself and his family, live with them, and not work. He is doing everything he can to tarnish my reputation with my family, sending lengthy text messages daily about his complaints. I have been ignoring them so far because I am more heartbroken than angry at his behavior. I was ready to leave after 6 months, but it remains difficult. Divorce still carries a stigma, especially in our culture. I am in favor of ending it somewhat amicably, but he is being ruthless and accusing me of many things, suggesting that my departure was premeditated. If it were premeditated, I would not have left all my worldly possessions and valuables at his parents' house. One of the primary issues was his insistence that I conform to his way of life. He had financial difficulties, but I wanted both of us to work, save, and achieve success. However, he did not want that. He preferred to maintain his current lifestyle while expecting me to adjust to a frugal existence. Why? What is wrong with aspiring for more through hard work? His family absolutely detested the idea of ambition. They believed their lifestyle and choices were flawless. They had virtually no friends or family and lived in isolation, expecting me to do the same. I feel like I am not losing much, yet it was still a year of my life, and there were positive memories as well. I wish he were not so vindictive and I were not so naive. How do I move forward and process everything? I am terrified. Story 5. Struggling with communication in a new relationship. My boyfriend seems to care, but his efforts feel half-hearted. Am I asking for too much when I just want consistent communication? Can he really change? Hello. I understand that Reddit is not the most reliable source for relationship or any kind of advice, but I will give it a try. I am a 22-year-old female, and I have recently begun dating a 28-year-old male. Our relationship has progressed very quickly, as I have been spending weekends with him since we first met. He is enjoyable to be around in person, and he calls me most days. However, there are times when it feels as though I am not a priority to him, and that I am merely an afterthought. It seems as if he does not care. We both work in blue-collar jobs, and he has been single for 2 years. He supposedly had an ex-girlfriend who was bipolar, which he had to deal with. When we first met, he appeared to be fairly committed. I even traveled out of state to visit him for a job a couple of weeks ago, even though it had only been a month since we started talking. I have made an effort to see him, and while he pays for dinners and small treats, that is really where his effort ends. Despite our fast pace, I have remained realistic about the situation. I genuinely like this guy, but there are many things he says and does that raise doubts. I excuse his behavior by saying he is not someone who is constantly on his phone and that he is quite independent. He also has a very dangerous job, so I do not expect him to text frequently while at work. Initially, he used to text a lot, and we would talk on the phone for hours when we first started dating. I understand that this level of communication is not sustainable. However, I expressed to him last week that I need more than just good morning and good night texts. He often sends a good morning text, but I rarely hear from him again during the day. I mentioned that I appreciated receiving good morning texts, and although he claimed to enjoy sending them, he did not send one the very next morning. I then sent him a message regarding the importance of consistent communication. He was active online and read my message but chose to ignore it. It is possible that he was too busy and simply overlooked it, as he does tend to forget. Last Friday, we discussed this over the phone, and he seemed to understand my concerns. We made our relationship official last Saturday and spent a few enjoyable days together. However, as soon as I am not physically with him, the texting becomes minimal, and we have only one phone call. He is making more time for me than anyone I have dated in the past. I have only been officially in a relationship for 1 week, and have seen only a couple of guys for longer than a month. Everyone else was incompatible, ghosted me, or only wanted a casual connection, especially when it comes to phone calls, but that is the extent of his effort. He returned to his hometown for 2 weeks, and now we are back to having very little communication. He is not someone who spends much time on his phone, but I expected him to make more of an effort. I realize that I might be jumping around in my thoughts, and this may not be very coherent, but I want to acknowledge that I have a tendency toward anxious attachment. I do not date many people and often seek reassurance excessively. I know I need to work on this aspect, but I believe that if I were receiving a bit more from him, I would not feel the need as much. This is why I appreciate the little texts and phone calls. One issue I have with our phone calls is that once he is finished, he seems to want to end the conversation abruptly. Last night, I was feeling particularly anxious, so I spent too much time discussing my concerns. Once he concluded the call, he appeared eager to hang up because he had another call to make and laundry to do. I understand he has obligations while at home, but I found that behavior rather rude. I am unsure if I should be worried, but he used to be more eager to talk and put forth significantly more effort when we began dating at the end of January. If I bring this up, he insists that this is simply his nature. He has mentioned multiple times that he would be willing to make things official if I am prepared to handle his behavior. I do not mind his quirks, but I feel that he is not putting in enough effort. I believe that when someone is genuinely interested, they do not take all day to respond to messages during their days off and actively seek to communicate with you. They do not hang up after an hour for some reason and then begin talking to the next person for an extended period without being considerate during the call. Perhaps I am being unreasonable. It often feels like it is his way or nothing, and he has communicated this to me directly. I hope for a genuine relationship with him, as he has many positive qualities, and I believe we are compatible, but I recognize that he may not be willing to compromise. Therefore, My concerns might not warrant discussion since I am choosing to accept this behavior. I do not want to change him. I just think that basic respect should be a given. I am not asking for much, but I have already expressed on several occasions that I need consistent communication, which is not being met. If our time together in person were not enjoyable, I don't believe I would continue to consider this relationship. I often feel like I am losing my mind. I have specific preferences regarding who I date. They must work in blue-collar jobs and be conservative, and perhaps that is why my previous relationships have not worked out. With him, he simply reassures me that everything will be fine. I understand that my need for reassurance can be problematic, but I do not believe that asking for communication is an unreasonable expectation. I also do not think that if he truly likes me as he professes to, he would be so quick to end our conversations. If anyone has followed my thoughts, what are your opinions? I realize I may be rambling. However, I do not want to say anything that could jeopardize this relationship, and I am uncertain whether my requests are too demanding. To summarize, I am experiencing communication issues with my new boyfriend and am unsure if I am asking for too much. Story 6. When Nate criticized my multimedia presentation, I decided to comply with his demands in a way he didn't expect. I made the font ridiculously large, causing chaos during the service. Did I teach him a lesson or just make things more awkward for everyone? I, a 34-year-old male, had always been involved in multimedia for my church for many years, so displaying lyrics and creating PowerPoint slides are second nature to me. I was scheduled to manage the multimedia this morning, so as usual, I arrived and created what was needed. I set up all of the lyrics, Bible verses, and the slides that had been sent by the speaker before I went to the restroom. When I returned, I noticed the guy who usually plays the bass, Nate, but he was not scheduled to play today. He was engaged in a conversation with another person behind the multimedia station. I went back to my station and began pre-displaying everything on the screen to ensure that I could read everything, which I did before I realized that Nate was looking at my station. 5 minutes before we were set to begin, Nate suddenly inquired about what I had prepared. I showed him everything, the lyrics, the Bible verses, and the slides, just to appease his curiosity. As a side note, I do not particularly like Nate for several reasons. He subscribes to many conspiracies shared on social media, and when someone questions him, he argues without ceasing. Most of us try to avoid starting a conversation with him entirely, including me. Additionally, whenever he is scheduled to play bass, he adjusts his amplifier's volume to a level significantly higher than the other musical instruments, to the point where I can feel the vibrations every time he plucks his bass, since the multimedia station is situated at the very back of the room. He is just exceedingly obnoxious. Apparently, his obnoxiousness was particularly pronounced today because as soon as he saw the slides I prepared, he commented that the font size was too small. He did not say, "It might be too small." Rather, he stated, "It is too small." I told him that it was acceptable and that it was the standard font size we all use week after week, but he would not let it go. At this point, the service had started, but for some reason, he did not go to find an empty seat in the audience. Instead, he sat on a stool behind my station while continuously telling me that the font was too small. At this stage, I was listening to his incessant mantra about the font size while displaying the lyrics for the singers. After a few minutes, I asked him if he planned to sit with the audience. I kid you not, this was his response. "Original poster, your font is too small. You need to increase it." I could not believe it. He was so fixated on the font size of my slides that he refused to leave me alone until I complied with his demands. By this time, even the pastor's wife asked him to please take a seat in the audience, to which he replied that it was better for him to sit there because if he sat in the audience, he would not be able to see anything. I had reached my limit. Malicious compliance initiated. While still managing the displayed lyrics, I also edited the slides in his presence, multitasking in the process. Keep in mind, the service had already begun, so I could not actually display the revised slides solely for validation. I increased the font to such an extent that the slides looked absurd. Previously, there were only 10 slides. One slide could contain 6 to 7 lines of 2 to 3 Bible verses with a translation section below it. Now, there are approximately 40 slides, each with 15 lines that contain only 6 words apiece, and I could barely fit the translation part. Each slide could contain only one verse. It appeared completely atrocious. After witnessing the havoc he had caused, he patted me on the back, gave me a thumbs up, and went to find an empty seat. I looked at the pastor's wife, even she shook her head. During the sermon, the atmosphere was extremely awkward. The speaker was having a difficult time reading from the screen because he kept pausing after each line. I also had to switch the slides more quickly than before because each only contained one verse, which disrupted the speaker's rhythm. After 10 minutes, the speaker gave up and decided to read from his own Bible, which prompted most of the audience to follow suit. I noticed many audience members pulled up their Bible applications on their phones and read from there, even Nate. I texted Nate, "Why are you reading from your phone? I thought you wanted the font to be bigger so you could read from the screen." And in response, he turned and glared at me silently. After the service concluded, the speaker approached me and asked if everything was okay, as the slides did not resemble what I typically created. The pastor's wife joined us, apologetic, and explained the entire situation. Then, we looked for Nate but could not find him in the crowd. I suppose he was too embarrassed to acknowledge his blunder.